Hey, I'm ZSH and this is the Barnyard Animal Pack. This pack is an absolute game changer, and today we are building a proper petting zoo. Today we're going to build our first animal encounter. So what is an animal encounter? That is the new feature in the update that releases alongside the Barnyard Animal Pack. And what it means is once a habitat has met certain conditions, you can turn it into an animal encounter. And when the guests go into that habitat, they will leave the paths and just walk all around the habitat and interact with the animals. So there are various things you need to make sure that a habitat can be turned into an animal encounter, and we will discuss that when we get there. And we're going to build a little paddock, a petting paddock, if you will, that the guests can go into and actually interact with the animals. I've stolen this name wholesale from San Diego Zoo. I liked the alliteration. And the first thing that we're going to do is build an entrance to the area with a very rustic looking wooden archway that the guests are going to pass under. This is copied pretty much wholesale from San Diego Zoo, and then the rest of our petting zoo will be my own creation. So I want the guests to pass under here, and then we're going to put a sign in with the name of the area on it. Alright, let's discuss the plans for this area as a whole then. We're going to have 2 animal encounters here, the goats and chickens, and then one for alpacas. Really looking forward to that one. Alpacas are so popular in zoos as well as farms right now, so it'll be really cool to get those into the zoo. We're also going to have an exhibit for Hermann's tortoise. I've been wanting to get Hermann's tortoise into the zoo ever since the Eurasian Animal Pack came out, and I could never think of anywhere appropriate to put them, with the exception of the children's zoo. So now that we get to build it, we're going to have Hermann's tortoise in there as well. This entrance archway is pretty much done. This triangular sign took quite some doing. I think it looks really good in the end. I was not expecting to use rope pieces to build it, but in the end they looked a lot better than the sticks I was trying to begin with. We're going to put some gates in the back of this archway here so that if any of the animals wander out of their paddocks, they're not going to wander out of the children's zoo itself. They'll still be safely contained in here. And I'm going to put a bin right in the middle behind the sign at the front to stop the guests from walking through the midsection, so they actually walk through the left and the right as they're supposed to. What we're going to do now is build a big old barn that is going to be the night quarters for the animals, somewhere that the guests can go into and provide a centerpiece for this habitat. That there is the guest gate that we all know and love, or all know anyway. That has been replaced in this pack or supplemented with the small guest gate, which is just as wide as this one, but much lower. It looks really cool, much more realistic and farm-like. It's like a proper old school farm gate. So I'm sizing this building around the old guest gate, and then we can put the new guest gate in a bit later. This part of the build is all done when I know that the Barnyard Animal Pack is coming out, but I don't have it yet. And then in a minute or so, we're going to switch to building with some of the new Barnyard Animal Pack pieces, and there are some really, really good pieces in this pack, which you will see in a second. This barn is based on one I saw at Franklin Park Zoo in the USA. And while we finish building it, let's talk a bit more about the new animal interactions, because it's not just the animals from the new pack that can do this. There's a whole host of animals that are already in the game that you can place into animal encounters. Capuchins, fallow deer, peafowl, Japanese macaque, llama, quokka, raccoon, wallaby, reindeer, all 3 species of lemur, and the capybara can all go into these new experiences. There's the new guest gate. Let's take a look at the new pieces in this pack. There's only 60 pieces in this pack, which is less than usual, but to be honest, it's not really the number of pieces that count, it's the number of usable pieces that count, that you actually are going to put into your zoos, and there are a lot of really usable pieces in this pack. We got things like this metal gate here, finally like a generic metal fence. We've had a few in the past, but they're always really specific, either very modern looking like the ones in the aquatic pack, or like rusty fences, or very Victorian looking fences. So having just a really generic one like this is great. Those hay bales and finally wooden barrels are going to see a lot of use, I think. We've got picket fences, a load of new vegetables, the world's biggest sign, not sure how often I'm going to be using that one. This wind pump is great for background scenery, and these wooden gates are going to be going pretty much everywhere in more rustic themed builds, I think. So good. They've even got like the catch on it that you use to lock the gate once you've gone through. And yeah, I think 60 very well chosen pieces. I'm going to get a lot more use out of this than I thought. You might have seen the amazing new stone walls as well. They're actually a blueprint, they're just the faux rocks, but they've been put together so nicely. That blueprint will be featuring heavily in today's build. Alright, what we're doing here is laying out the basics of the Alpaca Encounter that will come later, using one of the new fence pieces. I just want to get the shape of this habitat, and more importantly, the size of this habitat. So this is what the whole children's zoo is going to look like. We've got that barn away on the left, which is where today's habitat's going to go. We've got the alpacas at the back, and the entrance at the front. Now we're going to build the animal encounter. So this is the blueprint I was talking about, these dry stone walls with the gate in the middle. It looks so good. I think this is only the second time I've ever used a Frontier blueprint in the zoo, but that dry stone wall, I've got to admit it is better than the one we built for the islands, and I am very happy to use it here. This is a very, very British farm kind of theme that I wanted to add in here, and it will go really nicely with the more generic sort of wooden farm that could be anywhere in Europe or the US really, that we'll be using for the rest of the area. I've turned the blueprint into one solid piece of wall just by taking both sides and removing the gate in the middle. We're going to use that to build the perimeter for the experience, and this will fill this half of the children's zoo. I really love the nettles and the other plants that have been added onto this stone wall in the blueprint as well. Everything just sits in really nicely, and it's made building this perimeter wall really, really easy. So I'm putting a gate in here and using some of the new pieces so that the catches and the hinges and everything all line up perfectly. Love the amount of detail on these pieces. And then I'm gonna essentially make that almost pointless by actually opening the gate so that the animals and the guests can get in here. But I like the fact that even with the gate open, you can see that there's hinges and a catch on the side of the barn walls for it. Just another little touch of realism, which is always nice. And then we're going to move on and put a window in to the top of the barn. I'm going to stack loads of these little planks right next to each other so they're all evenly spaced, and then we can delete a certain amount of them and leave a certain amount of them in, and we end up with the evenly spaced planks. And we're going to use some other planks at the top here just to fill the rest of the walls in. There's no planks in the same set as the one I've used to build the main walls that are small enough to do this, so I'm using some planks from the Twilight pack, just recolouring them to get them as close as possible. We're going to put some shutters in, and then some mesh into the window. It won't actually have glass in it. And then finally we'll move on to the inside of the barn. We'll put some extra planks into the roof for detail, and then we'll move on to areas for the animals, again using these new metal fences. This is always a challenge in franchise mode, trying to build any sort of realistic shelter for the animals, because if you put the gates and all the various holding machinery and contraptions in that you should have, then the animals can't actually get in there, so you always have to sort of leave a big open space. We'll put some lights in just to brighten it up in here and put a central beam across the top so the lights have got something to be fixed into like so. We'll put our new weather vane on the top of it, and then we'll move on and make a little chicken coop. This is again based on something I saw at Franklin Park Zoo. So the chickens can free roam all around the area, and then we'll encourage them to come into here sometimes with some enrichment items, just so you get that sort of farmyard experience of the chickens behind some wire mesh. I'm using the horizontal planks as spacers to make sure that the vertical planks are exactly evenly spaced. And then we're going to extend the longer planks to meet this last one here, so we can get the correct size for this little chicken coop. I've had a lot of fun building things out of wood and building things that look fairly cheap. Not something we do very often in this zoo, so it's made a really nice change. Using lots of different wood pieces, mainly from the Twilight pack, but also there's been quite a few base game pieces in this build, like the East Asian wood. It's got such a nice texture. It's not that usable because of the weird sizes it comes in, but when you get a build that's actually going to fit it, it's really useful. We'll get some corrugated roofing in as well. Want a really sort of cheap farm kind of look to this. No one's spending huge amounts of money on 4 chickens. And then we'll get some more wood from the Twilight pack to make the back of the habitat. And finally, put a concrete floor in, make it easier to clean. The chickens are going to be in here a lot. Might put some decals on here just to indicate that the chickens have spent some time here. And we'll copy one last one along to the end, and then just move it up 1 pixel so it doesn't flicker. And then we'll put the enrichment items in here. Just going to have a little water bowl, and one of the slow feeders should do the trick for us. For the final part of the build, getting the animal encounter working. So the first thing I want to do is have some rocks for the goats to get up onto here. For some reason the alpine goats don't use the goat mountain. I don't know if they're too small for it. I don't think it's that, because the Dall sheep are pretty tiny. Maybe Frontier forgot. Maybe it's just an issue with the early access version I'm using here. But I made my own anyway, and the goats will be able to get up on here. We're going to put some paths in. To be honest, you don't really need any paths at all in an animal encounter, But after, what, 3 years of building habitats with paths in, I couldn't build one without them. As soon as they get through that gate, they're just going to wander off and go wherever they like, basically. And I want to keep this sort of dirt flooring in here. That's kind of very usual for this kind of build, but I just want to make it look a little bit more interesting. What we're going to do is make some little random piles of rocks using some of the smallest faux rocks, and just make sure random rotation all is turned on, and just start placing these round in a little pile. Use a few different rocks so it is really diverse, and then once we've got them all in there, we can turn them into a group and then sink them down into the ground so just the tops are poking out. Pick a bit more of an appropriate color, more of a grey to match the larger rocks, and then we can just scatter these all around this area, mainly keeping to the edges. You don't want the guests falling over them. I might put a few not quite round the edges like that one, just for effect. And we'll put a load of them around the main rocks just so that they're not sticking out of the ground, so obviously they're a bit more cohesive with the surrounding terrain. And then we can activate the animal encounter. So what we need to do is add in one of the new hygiene stations, which the guests will actually come and use once they've interacted with an animal. This is the penultimate piece in the puzzle. You can see the tick box on the right, which you need to complete to turn this into an animal encounter. And once we've got this in, the last thing to do is add some interactive animals. They will be here in a few seconds time, but first we'll add in some of the conservation benches and these cute new farmyard style canopies, and then it's time to take a look at the finished animal encounter. Here we go, our first guests are on their way into the animal encounter. Let's check out the way they can interact with the animals in here. Here's the chickens. So good to have another bird in the game, and the way the guests actually bend down and look at them, it's just so cool. It's something we've never seen in Planet Zoo before. We've had interactions with a couple of the exhibit animals, like the exhibits and the bats, but getting large-scale interactions with habitat animals is just amazing. I am absolutely loving this. Now, the alpaca paddock's going to be very similar to the goat and chicken paddock, so I'm basically going to skip almost the entire build of this bit and just show you some of the little bits of detailing we're doing, like a little tractor tire on this wall here, and then some of the enrichment items and things like that. And we're going to dress this stable up a little bit by putting some of the rustic pieces on here. So we're just going to drop some more hygiene stations in here for the guests so that they can pet the alpacas. And that's the alpaca habitat pretty much done. We will of course take a look at that in a lot more detail at the end of the video. Let's get on to the tortoise exhibit. So this is where the Hermann's tortoise exhibit is going to go, and you know what we do with the exhibits in this zoo, we're always trying to disguise them and make them look much more realistic and much more interesting. So what we're going to build today is a really rustic wood and mesh exhibit, which is going to be pretty tricky considering the exhibits are made entirely out of glass and metal, but that is what we're going to do. It's going to be quite a challenge, but I think with enough detailing we're going to make it work. So we've got two exhibits next to each other here. We're going to get them right back up against the fence that leads towards the Australian area, and then we'll go into the exhibits and start playing around with them. So with two identical exhibits next to each other, we'll drop some tortoises in so we can see what the backdrop's going to look like, and then we'll start playing around with all the different elements and work out which way around do we want to spin each exhibit to make the contents of the exhibit make as much sense as possible, turning on and turning off all the different pieces until I've got a layout I like where it feels balanced and it feels like one long habitat, which is what we're going to be going for here. So this is based on the habitat I saw in, I think it was Supercut Zoo, which I think is here in the UK. Not a zoo I've actually been to myself. I just saw a cool Hermann's tortoise mixed aviary sort of habitat, and that's good because these exhibits are 4 meters high, so basing one on an aviary for tiny little birds that had Hermann's tortoises wandering around at the bottom is going to be really useful. It gives us an excuse for why this Hermann's tortoise exhibit is so high. I'm not going to put any birds in here because we're going to be really close up to them, so I don't want to use any of the prop birds when we're going to be in this closer proximity to them. The first thing we're going to do is get some angled wood planks in to form the base of the habitat, and this will also cover up the black metal base of the exhibit piece itself. So we'll just rotate these and then put these ones underneath and slightly behind the ones above, and then copy them down again. I really like wood when it's like this, gives that kind of a shed kind of vibe, which is really sort of low budget rustic habitat. This it's going to look really cool in this children's zoo. And then we use these temple pieces so that there's a base underneath the exhibit where it sits on top of the ground. These paths that you can see, this will all be covered up with tarmac later on. but you always see this with any sort of wooden build that needs to be stable and around for a long time. They tend to have a small concrete base underneath them. And then we're going to move on to the next issue we have with this exhibit, namely that because it's got glass sides, the terrain in the exhibit, the sort of dirt sand mixture, is actually pressed up against the glass. You can see where it's rising up against the glass. Now obviously if this is a mesh habitat, then dirt is not going to do that. It's going to fall through the mesh. So what we're going to do is put some wood planks in that go right up to the top level of where the terrain is, and that will prevent it from looking like it's up against some glass. So we use these planks as boards to achieve that, and then it's onto the mesh. So what we're going to do is take one of the mesh pieces and place it onto the glass, and then move it so it is just like 1 pixel in front of where the glass is, and then center it on the habitat. And then we're going to copy it on top of itself and move it so that we've got even smaller mesh than we normally have. The sort of mesh you'll normally see in habitats like this, rather than the much wider mesh that the game gives us. That also provides even more coverage on the glass and disguises that. And then we're going to put some planks in to actually hold up the roof of this exhibit. We'll have 5 vertical planks in the end, which just helps to disguise the fact that this is 2 4-meter boxes together. Put a few planks on the roof, and then we'll start colour matching everything so we can start to make it look cohesive. There we go, looking good. Let's move on to the inside. So I really like the 3D rocks that you can get at the back of the exhibits. I really do not like the sort of plain blue background above it. So we're going to cover all of that up with some more planks, and that's going to further sell the illusion that this is a completely wooden habitat with mesh sides. Get rid of some more of the sort of standard in-game elements, and we'll cover up the join between the exhibits with those as well. And this is starting to look vaguely decent, but it needs a lot more work. So we'll move on to the inside. We're going to put a wooden ceiling in and some cross beams and things like that, just to cover up all the metal at the top. It also covers up the lights as well, which you don't really need because we've got heat lamps down there and we're outside, so lighting shouldn't really be necessary anyway. And then we're going to move back on to the outside and sort out some access for the keeper. So we'll cover up this half of this side of the habitat with some more planks. And then we're going to put some doors in. We'll put this African door on both sides of it so it looks like the keepers get in and out of the habitat. And we'll put some stairs in as well so the keepers can get up here. And then we're going to concentrate on covering up some more of the glass. So I've covered the whole middle area of the 2 exhibits with some more planks. Then we're going to delete a couple so it's like a little hole that the tortoises can get through. And we'll further sort of sell that idea by adding a little ramp in to both sides so that the tortoises can climb up here and get into each side of the habitat. It'd also give the zoo a way of splitting tortoises up if they needed to for any reason. And then we're going to build a little house for the tortoise to go inside the habitat as well. I saw a lot of little shelters for tortoises. They like that, presumably for hibernation and things like that. Even if it's indoors, they just seem to like to have a little gap to get into. So we're going to make a really simple little house for them. I think it's like 5 pieces or something, but it's all we need. The whole thing is built out of these pieces from the Twilight Pack, and we're just going to move these. It looks massive because that's how big these pieces are, but all we're going to do is drop this into the habitat and bury it into the substrate, and we've got a really cute little home for the tortoises. You can see how tiny they are here. And after that, just a couple of finishing touches. We're going to grunge up this wood with a decal. We're going to drop one of our custom signs in here, and that is the Hermann's Tortoise exhibit done. I think it sells the illusion pretty well. Next stage is to get an animal talk point in. One of the things I've always wanted in the children's zoo is an animal experience where the keepers will get one of the animals out of their habitats and show it to the guests, and Hermann's Tortoise is perfect for that. So we're going to take an animal talk point and then we're going to disguise it. We're going to put it under a water tower and then cover this bit up with one of the milk churns, or 2 of the milk churns rather, because it's a bit taller than them. And then we're going to change the colour, and we end up with something that really fits in nicely, and you can't see the animal talk point at all. Let's move back to the petting zoo and make something really cool, a chicken bouncer for the kids. I'm not sure if these are actually called bouncers or springers or what, but you know what I mean. One of the things you get in children's playgrounds was an animal with a spring attached to it that the kids can sit on and bounce around on. I noticed that the chicken sign in the game is the perfect size to make one of those, so I thought it'd be really fun to try and make one. So what we're going to do is copy the chicken sign on top of itself loads and loads of times until we've got what looks like a solid piece of wood with a chicken painted on it. And when we've got it looking the way that we want it, we'll copy the whole thing again to the other side so that we got 2 sides to the bouncer. And then we're going to find some tiny wood pieces and make a little seat for the kids to sit on. They won't actually be using this, obviously, there's no way to get that to happen, but I want a group of these in the children's playground. I think that's going to make it sit in really nicely with the rest of the build. We're going to find some more tiny wood pieces to make the handles where their hands and feet go. And then I'm going to try and make the spring as well. So you can see my first attempt in the background, which I made with the rope pieces, but I figure we can make it look better than that with these gutter pieces. So we're going to copy a load of these up here, and then we're going to take one and spin it to a different angle, and then start copying that down again. And that gives us more, I think, of a sort of springy kind of look where you can sort of see through it, unlike with the rope. Then we're going to use these, I think they're light fixtures, just to make the handles look a bit better. And then I've switched out the wood for a different, even smaller piece of wood that's recolorable so we can get the seat to fit in nicely with everything else. And there we have a little chicken bouncer. Let's get on with the rest of the kids' play area. So I'm using the mud panels to make a sort of that kind of rubbery texture that you get on kids' playgrounds so they don't break anything if they fall off stuff. I've got some logs and our animal sleeping log because that's big enough for kids to crawl through, thanks to Planet Zoo's hitboxes. And then we're going to use some more wood just to create a nice white surround so that it stands out nicely against the rest of the area. And then we're going to cover the whole thing in concrete. So all of the more rustic children's zoos and petting zoos that I was looking at in my research basically just had concrete or tarmac floors. I guess this is an area for kids. And the last thing you want to do is spend loads and loads of money on every aspect of the area when they're basically going to be happy if they've just seen a chicken. That being said, I'm going to keep a bit of the grass around the entrance here. It's only just like a fairly small kind of lawn. And then we're going to put some of the new picket fence pieces down, coloured these brown to go in nicely with all the rest of the build. And we'll just lay these along both sides of the entrance gate. Again, it's just got that nice rustic feel that we want for this area, and it's always fun to use new pieces anyway. And then we're going to apply the finishing touch to the kids' playground. So I feel like no kids' playground is complete without a slide, and I just happened to see on the workshop this incredible children's playground made by Wix. I think it's #1 on the workshop as I record this. He is an absolutely incredible builder. He normally does more fantasy kind of stuff, but he is just as good at making realistic stuff. So I'm going to steal the slide from his blueprint because it's got quite a rustic look to it anyway. I'm going to drop that into the kids' playground and move everything around to accommodate it until I'm happy with the layout. On to the last part of the build, which is just making the whole area look really good. So I'm going to build a little sort of display here with the rustic well piece, a tree, and then some plants. And we're going to make the borders for it using a modified version of the dry stone wall. So I've just got the top of the wall here. We're going to make a really, really rough circle with it so it still looks pretty rustic. And then we're going to just go around and delete the parts that stick out until we end up with a charming little circle that isn't quite perfect. I figure in this barnyard area that a not quite perfect circle would be kind of fun. We'll fill in the gaps in the middle with some of the circular mulch pieces, always the best pieces to use to get this kind of soil effect. We'll put in one of the new plants and then one of the old plants and then a load of these cornflowers, I think they are. I love this little blue flower. It's definitely my favourite flower in the game. On the rare occasions that I have flowers rather than plants anywhere, it's normally these. They look so good. Just need to move this bush just to get everything lined up and looking good. And then we'll drop a few final plants at the back to break up the join between here and the water terraces. And that is the petting paddock done. Let's check it out. Here we go, from Australia to the barnyard. Everything is done and looking rather nice. Here's the view from the entrance, got a new little sign on that, and you can see Hermann's tortoise in the background. Here's the view across the kids' playground. We've got a new Roman Ices van in the background as well. There's a little water feature, which I forgot about, in the kids' playground, and here is the alpaca paddock. These guys are so cute. I said this in the trailer video, but the fur simulation on the alpaca is something else. It is so good. They are the fluffiest animal I've ever seen in a video game, that's for sure. Here's the Hermann's tortoise habitat. I'm very happy with how this one turned out. Let's check them out. These guys are really cute. I didn't realise how small Hermann's tortoises were until I built this. You can see the little gap for them to get from one side of the habitat to the other, and we've even got a backstage, which is very rare for one of our builds. Here's the animal talk points with the keeper showing the tortoise to the kids. The petting paddock is done. I really hope you guys enjoyed that. Thank you for watching as always.